𝗃𝗲𝗺𝗀𝗀 agus 𝗁𝗪𝗃 Codh Brehon is Misha Queeving of Flanagan. Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. I'm Kevin Flanagan. And in this video, I'm going to be speaking to Nathan Featherstone. Now, Nathan is an expert on martial arts. He used to be MMA fighter, and he's recent years been exploring Irish martial arts, and that includes Bataireacht. Not the card game, it's the stick fighting that was famous here on these islands for, I guess you could say, for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But before I get into that, I just want to remind you to check out my website, brehonacademy.org. Check out the merchandise store over there. Check out the online courses. I have 3 of them. It's Early Irish Culture and Society, Irish Mythology, and the Brehon Laws of Early Ireland. Check us out on social media, please, as well. We're on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And if you want to support my work even more, you can become a member today by clicking the join button down there. And members get all sorts of perks. You're going to get early access to ad-free, pre-released videos. You're going to get, in the future, access to competitions. And you're going to get access to exclusive members-only content. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then click join and consider becoming a member today. Now, with all that being said, let's jump into the interview with Nathan Featherstone. Hello, Nathan. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. I know you're going to talk about a topic that I think most of my audience are interested in, and I'm sure by the end of this, all of my audience are going to be interested in, and that's Bataireacht. But before we get to that, let's just explore a bit of your background. I know you do Viking reenactment as well with my brother, so maybe we can talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get to the Bataireacht.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me on. Absolute pleasure. I love the work you're doing with the Brehon Law. Yeah, I first kind of got introduced to this stuff. I've been doing martial arts since I was a little kid. And at around my kind of teens, when the internet started to open up in Ireland, I went looking for Irish martial arts because I figured there must be something out there with all the history that we have. And around that same time, I got into reenactment and started doing the Viking reenactments with your brother Darren. Shout out to him, a wonderful guy, guided me through these past 15 plus years. And yeah, I kind of got introduced to Irish stick fighting. I found out there were styles out there, that there's people still doing it. And I suppose the immediate question I get, especially from a lot of Irish people, is why have they not heard of it? Why is it not a well-known thing? Much of this was kind of preserved with the diaspora, the people who left Ireland, as a lot of Irish traditions are. Now, there is one of the styles that I teach is still, the original family, I should say, are still based in Ireland.
The O'Daly's, is it?
No, well, I'll get to that one. So, yeah, I mean, basically, I got into MMA. I had a kind of very short-lived amateur MMA career, had some injuries that took me out, and got into teaching first the Doyle style of Irish stick fighting, which is kind of known for their kind of horizontal grip. That was the first one I learned and was exposed to, and became an instructor in that in, I think it was 2013, so about 12 odd years ago. And basically my group ever since has been the kind of first and longest running Irish stick fighting group in the country. Shortly after that, I went and started training and practicing with a group called the Dog Brothers, who are kind of like the UFC for stick fighting, I guess. Really lovely bunch of people, but basically everyone goes and tests their style against other styles, and I kind of put what I was doing to the test. During this time, I've been talking to a guy called 𝗃𝗵𝗶𝘀 from Canada, who is the head of 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀, which was the one I was referencing earlier. So that comes from a family in the north who, hence the name, they're from Antrim. And I was I've been pestering him for years to teach me, and eventually came over to Ireland, Maxime, and I spent some time with him and his lovely wife, and learned the style from him. Now, obvious question is, why is the guy in the north, not teaching it. He's involved in politics up there. If anyone knows politics in the north, being associated with violence isn't really something that goes down too well. So he just was happy to show someone it in private and not continue teaching it, which is why it's not really too well known as a result. And the Doyle stuff in recent years has really exploded in popularity, especially in America, which is wonderful to see. But like I said, I think a lot of Irish people are very hesitant to kind of accept Irish stick fighting, even though we have this massive, very well documented history of it. Even for any of your listeners who are familiar with my work, I have some audio recordings from Dukas, the folklore archive in UCD, of people who actually witnessed Irish stick fighting firsthand and actually trained it, discussing it in the late 1900s. And it's this amazing part of Irish history that people just really aren't exposed to. We were talking about this just before I went on camera, where most of Irish history, how it's taught in Irish schools anyway, you kind of do a bit of Egypt, a bit of Rome, a bit of Vikings, Normans, and then it skips to 1916, and everything in between is just thrown out the window.
Yeah.
And especially with this stuff, I mean, if I was to say the land wars to people, I think the majority of an Irish audience would not be familiar with that period of history and what was happening. Obviously, people know about the famine, but that was kind of the death toll for Irish stick fighting in the country for a number of reasons. But also the church made big efforts to eradicate it, as did the GAA, surprisingly. And a number of other kind of contributing factors kind of petered it out. But we also had collar and elbow wrestling, which was a style that I teach. There's a great guy, Tom Higgins, in Philadelphia, is really promoting that amazingly in the States at the moment. And that at one point was the most popular form of combat sports in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, so basically it was kind of boxing and collar and elbow, and collar and elbow was viewed as a bit more, a little less violent, because so there was less blood, so ladies could go and enjoy it. So it was a bit more open to people to going and seeing it. But yeah, that was kind of how I got into Bataireacht, and now I run a club in 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀 in Dublin City. And I've been kind of at it ever since.
Awesome. Well, we can get back to that at the end of this interview, because I want you to plug that for our audience, my audience. So what I want to ask you about is, let's go back in time now. What is the earliest evidence of stick fighting in Ireland? Off camera, you were saying that there was some effigy that depicts stick fighting. And what I'm reaching for is, could we consider hurling to be a form of stick fighting if you go back far enough?
I would definitely say yes. Now, this is one of the big areas of contention amongst kind of stick fighting historians.
Sure, it is.
Any official ones. But everyone says, it goes back to Cuchulainn, goes back to those ancient days. I think the important thing to understand is, yes, people did practice with sticks a lot. People fought with them. We have artwork going way, way back that does show that. And even the Romans, you have pictures of them using very, very similar cudgels at the time. There is, like I said, that effigy it's in Kilkenny in the cathedral there. I forget the name of it, but essentially it's a bunch of saints around the base of one of the tombs. And you see one of them, arms crossed with a shillelagh in it. Now, this is depicting a specific saint. I'm not very up on my saints, so forgive me. But basically, he was known to carry a club, so I have him depicted with it. But he's in the traditional Irish clothing of that time, carrying one. I would say, when we look at hurling, it's quite interesting, and that was, without rules, you kind of just pitted two towns against each other, or two groups, whatever came first. And you're trying to get a ball usually to one area, not necessarily into a goal. Like, you're just trying to keep hold of it. So it was much more like a kind of mock battle than it was a sport like we have now. But it was definitely a way to train. But I think the important thing to understand, which I think is where people kind of get a little bit confused and kind of romanticize Irish stick fighting a little bit, is yes, the lads were using them. Yes, they were fighting with them. You see it in the weapons of the period as well, where the Irish definitely had a preference for how they were holding things. So the very unique thing that you see, regardless of the style, I'm the only person currently that I'm aware of who teaches both styles, surviving styles, is they all hold the stick about a third of the way up. Main reason for that is you have, one end is weighted with a kind of a knob on it. If you hold it right at the end and you swing, it just kind of flies out your grip. So you see a preference in Ireland way back even into the early medieval period where people are holding or at least making axes in a way that kind of suggests that that's how they were being held. There is a very early artwork of Irish people using axes as walking sticks in a very similar way that you'd see people using shillelaghs. But a very roundabout point is that really when these weapons come into their height of use is due to the penal laws. Once they came in and eradicated ownership of any sort of weapon in Ireland, kind of that classic Lord of the Rings meme, like you wouldn't take a stick from an old man. So people kind of got around the laws by carrying walking sticks with them. And we have, from that period on, we have a massive amount of Irish terms and terminology for sticks of all different sizes. Some of them even in the west of Ireland, I still see pop up every now and then, like a 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀, which is like a short little kind of like blackjack. I know I've heard some people use that term when they're fishing for knocking fish out and that sort of thing. But it definitely stretches way back into the kind of antiquity period, and really kind of reaches its height in the kind of early 1800s.
How did faction fighting? How did that in the 18th and 19th century? Could you describe what faction fighting looked like, and how did the British establishment try to curtail that?
That is actually a great question. So a really interesting thing around faction fights is they're very different if we look at them in a city context or in a rural context. So rurally, most of them, or at least across all of Ireland, are centered around fairs and event days. So the term Donnybrook, that's where that comes from, to have a Donnybrook. I know a lot of American listeners would know that term, some Irish listeners too. And that was basically the Donnybrook Fair. There was a Donnybrook cattle market, and that goes back to, I think, the 1300s. Even then, there was a few references to people fighting at it. But cattle drovers especially would carry much larger sticks. And basically the faction fights were kind of organized fights, basically. They were kind of organized violence. You didn't really have Hurling or the GAA at the time, and a lot of, congregations and gathering of people were outlawed, so people would meet up and basically have a bit of a scrap for the fun of it, which is one of the interesting things about it, in that when we look at a lot of other stick fighting arts, usually the stick is a proxy for something else. So like in Southeast Asia, these arts are huge, fighting with sticks, but they're using this instead of a machete sort of thing, or a knife or whatever they would have at hand. Whereas with us, it's specifically a stick, and you didn't really want to kill people because that would lead to a lot of bad stuff happening.
Yeah.
Now, if we look in the cities, what happens there is that the guilds would actually fight each other. So if you're familiar with areas around Dublin 8, you have like Black Tar Street and Weaver Street. Those were where butchers' guilds and weaver guilds were. And you'll still see in some of those areas that they have the remnants of it, and there's some streets there that are still a load of butchers on them. And basically they just didn't get along, whether for the fun of it or not, I don't really know, but they used to meet up, and same thing on events days, religious days and holidays, they'd meet up and basically have a kind of arranged scrap. And to your question on how did the British deal with it is the interesting one, and this is the big difference, I think, with Irish stick fighting as opposed to a lot of other styles, is that you really didn't want to kill someone, because at the time, at least in many parts of the country, depending on the period we're looking at, the police force would essentially just call in the army to sort stuff out quickly. And there's a famous incident in, I think it was towards, I'm forgetting the area of Dublin, but it was over in towards Dublin 8 anyway.
Yeah. And
basically near Dublin Castle. Essentially the army got called in and shot, I think, about 15 people one day because someone had died in a faction fight. And these things weren't small events either. There's one in Kerry, I know, that was about 5,000 people took part in. So these are almost on par with small battles. Like they weren't a small event, so to speak. And we see that in the artwork. There's pictures of these huge mass brawls, and there was rules around them too. Like there was things that you just didn't do. And ladies were allowed to take part, but they weren't allowed to swing a stick. So they were known for having their wool socks with rocks put in the bottom of them. So if lads got knocked down, they'd be making sure they stayed down, basically.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was interesting times, but
yeah,
they were. It was definitely a very different kind of sort of events to what people really think that they were. But the thing that we start to see with it is that it kind of divides out into certain areas. You have guilds, and some of these are even kind of linked to the kind of secret groups that we see in around these times. So one of the big factions in around Kilkenny was the Whitefeet faction.
The which?
They were all the Whitefeet.
Whitefeet. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so basically they used to mine lime.
So okay.
For making mortar and stuff, so they had white feet basically from being in the lime mines. And some of them would go on to form secret groups for dealing with landlords and stuff at the time. And that's really where things kicked off and got a lot more violent, was in around the land wars, where people were being pushed off the land to make room for cattle and sheep. And at that point, the things got a lot more violent because people were basically fighting each other to retain their land. So these faction fights became a little bit more bloody and violent around that time as a result of it. But throughout the period, all the way up basically until kind of the late 1800s, these were often just done for the fun of it, which is, I think, some people are a bit surprised by it. People were beating each other up with sticks for the fun.
It reminds me of like modern hurling matches, because like when foreigners come and watch modern hurling matches, I mean, they're a bit aggressive, you know what I mean? It's like, and you can see foreigners kind of being shocked at how aggressive it is, but all the Irish people are kind of laughing at this because, and the thing is as well, even no matter how rough it is, they'll always shake hands at the end and walk away from each other. So there's a fairness in that as well. So I can absolutely imagine what it would have been like back then, before hurling existed, and they were having a bit of a scrap, as you said. So can you tell me about how the Great Famine then in the 19th century, how did that affect the practice of Bataireacht?
Yeah, that really had a huge knock-on effect. And it's interesting, like you see throughout this time, even the great Daniel O'Connell, who's the famous abolitionist. I always get this term wrong.
Abolitionist.
Abolitionist, thank you very much. Even he came out and kind of denounced these faction fights because he wanted the Irish on a world stage to be viewed as kind of later people came to say, like, poets and scholars. And there was a big push at the time from the church as well, obviously backed by the likes of himself, and even from the GAA, to kind of dampen down on faction fighting. But the famine was the real great kind of death toll for a lot of traditional Irish pastimes, activities, and customs and crafts.
Yeah.
Because basically you had whole towns that would just completely up and leave, they had nothing else to do. And the other side of it too is that a lot of the more violent aspects of faction fighting were dealt with through this. There was a lot more grimly, a lot more available land for people to use. So he didn't really have the same issues around, people being stuck for places to live.
Yeah.
But the one tiny positive, I guess, is that you have the likes of the folklore archive that was made off the back of this, where people did recognise, at least in Ireland, that a lot of these traditions and customs were dying out very rapidly. And you see the likes of David Keown, the kind of pretty famous stone lifter now, is I first came across years ago in Dukas, the folklore archive, finding out about lifting stones. I was finding out about Irish stick fighting. And you have some really mad stories from in there about what happened to some of these people. Like, there's one guy who became very famous, and I forget his name, but I think he was kind of nicknamed like Mexico Paddy or something like that, where he basically went to Mexico. He was a famous stick fighter, known, I think, in around the Kerry area for using two sticks, and went to Mexico and made a kind of reputation for himself as a tough guy down there. Which is pretty fascinating. They had all these guys going to the New World and still getting, taking lumps out of each other for the fun of it. Which is where a lot of the kind of remnants of these styles, such as the Doyle style, which kept going in Canada and in Newfoundland. And if anyone knows about that area, some of those guys have what sounds almost like a thick Kerry accent in some parts.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the different styles now.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's many different styles. You said each region has its own style and some clans had their own styles. So what can you tell my audience about the different styles? How many styles are there? Are there some styles that we don't know? You know, have they gone out of use? Are they extinct? Yeah. What would you say to my audience
Yeah,
about styles?
that is a superb question. So, as far as I know, there's kind of two predominant styles that remain. Thankfully, I've been able to learn both. You have the Antrim style, which is from the Antrim area, and you have the Doyle style, which is, as far as I can gather from research, kind of comes from the kind of Galway Mayo area. Now, there was, as far as we know, a lot of styles across the country, and especially in the south of the country, in around Cork and Kerry, they were kind of almost world famous for fighting with two sticks. What that looked like, we actually have no idea. Unfortunately, because everyone involved has gone, and all the records around it are kind of quite vague, which is a real shame. So it's quite a fascinating thing and has a lot of parallels to other parts of the world. Every now and then, there's things will pop up, references to it, and occasionally people will kind of claim that they have a family style here or a family style there. I've seen one or two that are somewhat credible, but having not trained in them or actually spent time with these people, it's hard to say. But definitely the Doyle and the Antrim style kind of tick the boxes. And what I mean by that is there's kind of characteristics of Irish stick fighting that make it unique. And anyone who's kind of spent time doing weapon-based martial arts would understand what I'm getting at. And we have actual books from the period that show techniques. I think that's the bit where everyone is like, oh, it's not a martial art. It was just, like you say, it's lads having a scrap in the field. It wasn't fighting. But there was authors writing books about it, and actually books with pictures that showed the techniques. There's only a handful, but it was being done. So people did recommend that this was an interesting thing that was happening. But the characteristics of Irish stick fighting, the main ones would be the thumb is always on the stick, so you always have a thumb up grip, and sometimes kind of referred to as a saber grip. Always the stick is held a third of the way up. But the sticks themselves are usually kind of hip height, they're kind of walking stick length. And the stance is very square, so it's not like karate or fencing. It's not very side on, it's very square. And anyone who's fought with sticks will kind of understand that's usually because a stick, it's a rant I have a lot with my own students. A stick is a stick. It's not a sword or a lightsaber. It doesn't cut people in half. Sometimes you whack someone, they just grab the thing. Give that to me. So it's To get back to the question, there was obviously at one point dozens and dozens of styles across the country, and unfortunately we've just lost so much of it.
That's so sad, because when you talk about different styles, and I know you're talking about martial arts as well, and I'm just thinking about how many styles of Irish stick fighting have we lost. And when you mentioned the Kerry men with the two sticks, and they were known for having two sticks, I just had a picture of all the different stances and all the different ways that you could hold the stick. And I wonder if there's a value in looking overseas to find these answers. And why I say that is because I was in Kenya twice, and I got these shillelaghs. This is like the Kenyan version of a shillelagh. And they fight with these. These are fighting sticks, And just before we came on, you were saying that there's a lot of parallels between the Kenyans, the Maasai to be precise, and the Irish style of stick fighting. And the reason why I asked that is because I've had trouble, with the Brehon law, trying to promote the Brehon law. And it was only when I looked to comparative legal systems, such as, tribal law, like Somali law, Sharia law, Hindu law, and the native law systems of the world, is when I really started to find a way to emphasize how important the native Irish law was to the sense of self, the sense of identity, and so on. So maybe you could spend a few minutes talking about stick fighting around the world, and not necessarily Irish stick fighting, but other tribal methods of martial arts.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I mean the African arts are one that I'm really fascinated by for the reasons you said. And it's one thing that throughout actual Irish history, and you'll see this in later periods, kind of, or well, depending on what you're talking about. But there's some really amazing parallels with how societies in Africa are structured, and obviously youth would have seen this through the law side of things too. And when you have such cattle-based societies, especially where they have such a focus on cattle herding, often that leads to cattle raiding, which leads to laws around that, which, you know, the weapons and the ways people fight evolve around that too, very interestingly. One of the big things, like you said, those, I think it's called a knobkerry, but I'll have to fact check that, which it looks, like you said, it looks exactly like a shillelagh. I mean, I don't know if you do video with these, but that's one I have there. It looks almost identical to the one you have, you know. It's a forward weighted club. And I did a video on it because it's interesting to see that they all swing their sticks in the exact same way that we do. Now theirs are a little bit shorter, but they have a forward weighted stick with the thumb up on it, often with a little bit sticking down past the handle, kind of protecting that lower part of the arm. Really, really interesting to see that what they do is like very unique to them. And I've seen in recent years, especially in South Africa, steps being taken to kind of preserve and teach that, which I find really, really interesting. And you see kind of parallels to that, like similar to what I'm trying to do and what you're trying to do, with preserving these kind of really interesting historical aspects of these cultures being kind of revived all across the world. I think New Zealand's one that really inspired me because of the work that the Maori people have done trying to preserve their martial arts, their language, and their law and culture as well. I know their arts really fascinate me because they have a real wide selection of weapons, but very unique to them because it's based on like a seafaring culture as opposed to us being an agrarian based culture. Like I was saying, in Southeast Asia, you have their stick arts are much more based around the use of machetes, because if you're trekking through jungle, that's the thing you want. The stick's only so useful. Whereas for us, the majority of the sticks is either for walking sticks, for cattle herding, for cattle droving. And it's the one thing as well that I would argue till as long as the day goes, that people say like, oh, stick fighting isn't a martial art, but you actually see similar all across Europe, and some of those arts are still going. In France, you have La Canne, which is still a big activity over there. Very similar idea, fighting with walking canes. In Portugal, and across the Iberian Peninsula, really, you have I'm going to butcher the name. It's a jogo de pau, which is basically fighting with a staff, because shepherds would have staffs for herding their sheep, and they'd learn to fight with them. You even have a kind of unique version of that they do in the Canary Islands. And you see similar stuff all across Europe, all across the world, really like. And I have a friend and kind of student of mine who's a Native American weapon maker from the Lakota people. And they have really, really fascinating similar clubs to what we would use as well. That same thing, that forward weighted thing. And I mean, if people have watched films, they probably would have seen them pop up here and there too. But it's interesting to have worked with him and taught him some things, because then he goes back and kind of refines what he's doing. And it's I think there's such a value to sharing these ideas with other cultures as well. It's one of the reasons why I was so happy to be involved with the Dog Brothers, because they are just a very eclectic mix of different people from different backgrounds. So I've been exposed to even Thai stick fighting, which is quite similar to what we do as well, because they use a very large kind of, looks almost like a katana with a much longer handle, but again, they use sticks as a training tool.
I think I know what you're talking about. I think I've seen some videos of that, yeah.
But they, like us, hold it a third of the way up, and often with a thumb on top, so very, very similar grip, and the movements really translate really well to what we do. So it's this stuff is all over the world, and it frustrates the heck out of me when people, it's like, oh yeah, there's a style here, there's a style here, there's a style there, there's a style there, yeah, and oh yeah, we did this, we did that, and then it gets to Ireland, like, no, it wasn't a thing.
Yeah. I can understand why you're frustrated. I previously was speaking to 𝗵𝗵𝗆, and he was saying that he had the same frustration talking about early Irish medieval history, and he's telling people about it. He's like, that's not that interesting. And it seems to be that, I don't know if it's a result of colonialism or what, but there seems to be a kind of a you know, a lack of respect and a lack of love for anything Irish, especially by Irish people. You know, even when it comes to the language, I'm learning the language on Duolingo. So I think the school system failed me. But if you say to a lot of Irish people, like, can you speak Irish? You'd often get the reactions like, why would I want to speak Irish for? That's a useless language. But I think they're only doing that because they're upset with themselves that they studied it for 12 years in school and they're not able to speak a word of it now, or maybe they go, I have 𝗃𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, you know, and that's the extent of it. Nathan, I'm just looking at the time here, and I know you have to go and do something. So how about you tell us about the classes that you're running in 𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀, and how can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So one tiny point before you end, because I think what you just said there is absolutely wonderful, is I've had that same argument with people. Someone first introduced me to that idea of post-colonialism, the way a lot of people, you know, after they've been colonized, kind of view themselves and their history as a little bit less than. That argument of what's the point? What's the point in stick fighting? What's the point in art? What's the point in music? Doesn't matter. You enjoy it, you should do it. That's my quick rant on that.
Okay.
You find me. It's the Rambling Kern, K-E-R-N. It's an old Irish term for a soldier or a warrior. You'll find me. Everything's under that online. I have a YouTube page if you want to look at more of what we do. If you want to actually see some of the techniques and see some of what I'm about. You'll find me Instagram under the same thing and everything else. If you want to pop me an email if you're interested in discussing this stuff further, it's ramblingkern@gmail.com, and you'll get me through there as well.
Okay.
Huge thank you for having me on.
What about the classes in 𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀?
Yeah, they are every Thursday. We're right behind with Maloney Motors. It's down a dark alley.
And can anybody just show up? Is there a price? Is there a cost when it's your first time, or can people just come and check it out?
Yeah, just come on down. And I'll supply you with all the equipment until you're up and ready to get going.
Awesome. Okay, Nathan, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for your time. Until next time, folks, slán go fóill. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I'm sorry we had to cut it short, but he had to go and collect his son from school. But I'm really glad that Nathan agreed to speak with me today. And I hope you learned a lot from this. Before I go, just to remind you once again, please check out the BrehonAcademy.org. Visit the merchandise store and grab a few t-shirts over there. These ones with the 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗀 on it. Check out the social media. Become a member. All of that good stuff. And until next time, friends, slán go fóill.